Right, in the second part of unpacking the NDP, it says the NDP is positioned as a working document that will be enhanced and improved through public criticism and dialogue. Right, so it actually assumes that. Focusing on urgency, it notes that reducing poverty and inequality isn't happening quickly enough. It emphasizes the target date of 2030. We know by what is happening on the streets that it really is incredibly urgent that there's a reduction of poverty and inequality. Promoting active citizenry and strong leadership. It says we need a new approach, one that moves from passive citizenry, receiving services from the state, to one that systematically includes the socially and economically excluded, where people are active champions of their own development, and where government works effectively to develop people's capabilities. It also recognizes as leadership as essential across all sectors of society, promotes collaboration, proposes a virtuous cycle, attack poverty and exclusion while nurturing economic growth, creating a virtuous cycle of expanding opportunities, building capabilities, reducing poverty, involving communities in their own development, all leading to rising living standards. I actually like the holistic focus of that, and realizing that systems are complex, and you want to change a system, you've got to change various aspects of those systems at the same time. Success is no one living under the poverty line. Of course, that's a huge emphasis in the SDGs as well. Right, there are the central challenges again. Employment and education are the highest priorities. And then there's a map from the Inequality Index. South Africa is currently the most unequal country according to the World Bank's Gini Index. We should be ashamed of ourselves. Yes. Go for it, yeah.
Most of you are familiar with. The Gini Index, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is a very well-known economic indicator which separates, it looks at the gap between the rich and the poor. That's it, it's called the Gini coefficient.
Yeah. The developmental framework, this is what Debbie was referring to earlier, that the social reality is still defined by apartheid and colonialism. So the one thing that really gets people is that there's this inequality and poverty, and the other thing is the apartheid which continues and colonialism which continues. The country's development path has not sufficiently broadened opportunities for black South Africans, especially women and youth. The socioeconomic conditions that characterize the system of apartheid and colonialism largely still define our social reality. The Commission defined development as the process of raising continuously the capabilities of all citizens, particularly those who were previously disadvantaged. Improving national capabilities looks at human capital, physical infrastructure, technologies, management skills, and social institutions that provide for better lives. Development has been unbalanced. Okay, I don't think we have to go through that one. Focus on women and youth. The NDP has cross-cutting themes around the impact of gender and improving life chances for the youth. The key determinant of success is whether a country can harness the advantage of having a large number of young people who are able and willing to work. We've got this enormous potential, actually. And then need to take account of external drivers of change. Examples are fast-growing developing economies like China and India, globalization, Africa's development as a larger context for South African growth and development, including skills and trade, climate change, and technological change. The SDGs, of course, addresses climate change as well. The RDP failed, in part because external drivers of change were not taken into account. Okay, and there are the summary of the NDP actions. So that is part 2. Part 3, which I should probably accept the changes. Right, science and technology are seen as drivers of development. In fact, science and technology is firmly a part of the NDP. Right, so the first chapter looks at key drivers of change, and that's what this part 3 is addressing. And then there are these various focuses that we saw before. Yes, please, Debbie.
Is it on? No. The reason why it just breaks it down is the NDP is a very weighty document. It's very difficult to navigate and understand exactly what's going on because the goals that are outlined don't necessarily align with the initial challenges. Then the goals outlined then don't align with the chapters. So you're unclear, all these words are sprouted at you, there's ideology that's pushed forward, you're not clear where it's positioned and where it sits. So in the breakdown analyses of the NDP, the idea is to give you access to a document and show where things line up. So in this instance, for example, it's constantly showing you the ultimate actions of what the NDP is trying to achieve, with their number one action being eliminating poverty and, my brain's gone dead, sorry, Monday morning, what was the other one? Eliminate poverty and? Thank you so much. Reduce inequalities, thank you for the youth. And then throughout this, going through it and analysing it and understanding it within a science context, we're actually looking at the chapters, aligning them again with the goals so you can see what fits where, and then bringing it down and seeing from a science and developmental perspective. That's why it's chapter 1 here alongside, where all the other goals are shown, because everything is intertwined. And you'll often hear, just in terms of working within government or with government, this is myself, I find that a lot of words are used that come directly from the NDP, and you're never quite clear what is meant, because it's not necessarily what's defined by, Wikipedia or online. Like, what do they mean by a developmental state? That was the previous one. It's actually outlined in the NDP, but nowhere in that chapter does it say we are talking about how we understand the developmental state to be. So that's why it works like this.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, there was some criticism at the time about it not being that coherent as one would expect. But I think it's because it's composed by a committee. So it's okay. Right. Talking about expressions that are not defined, a radical economic transformation is not defined either by government. It's sort of a fashionable phrase, but I don't think it appears in the NDP.
It
does. Does it? Okay.
It does appear in the NDP, but it's a word that's taken out of context now, and Bell Pottinger used it. The PR firm.
Yeah, in the UK. Yeah.
It's not, it's clearly explained that it makes sense within the NDP, but it's not as polarizing as it's been recently defined in the news.
Thank you. Now a misconception of mine has been cleared up. Right, so key drivers of change. The world is an interconnected global system. Increased interconnectedness has allowed threats to be spread more rapidly, such as the 1998 financial crisis. But it has also brought globalization with its benefits and opportunities. It's not always clear how the global system will respond to a specific scenario or risk. Interplay within the global system, technology increases the world's interconnectedness, impacting growth, trade, cross-border investment, etc. economic integration and increased global trade, yet many emerging economies are trapped in a cycle of poverty. Diminished distance through, for example, air transport, increased urbanization, increased inequality with globalization, and increasing gap between the rich and the poor.